Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Books and Beyond event. I'm your host, Pinky Shah, to get the event started with my co-host, Sabina. We have question and answer session planned for later, so feel free to raise your hand or type your questions in chat and we can ask it for you. Just as a reminder, we'll be recording tonight's event. So tonight we are joined by the international best-selling author of Go as a River, Shelley Reed. Shelley is a fifth-generation Coloradan. She lives with her family in the Elk Mountain of the Western Slope. She was a senior lecturer at Western Colorado University for nearly 3 decades, teaching writing, literature, and environmental studies. So I would like to now welcome Shelley. Thank you so much, Shelley, for joining us tonight, and welcome to our Books and Beyond author discussion series. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, I'm wonderful, and I'm so honored to be with all of you. So thank you so much for having me.
No, I can't wait to dive into our discussion. But before we do that, I just want to know a little bit more about your background and how I read a little bit that what you did, but just what led you to write your first novel?
Yes. Oh, yes. Well, I love that question because for me, it was a rather long journey. And I hope that if there are any writers out there who are, let's say, no longer 20 or 30 years old, who can take a little bit of inspiration from my journey, that always means a lot to me because I'm 58 years old now. I was 57 last year when my debut novel was published, and yet I honestly set out to be a writer from the time that I was a child. I always knew that's what I wanted to do. That's what I spent my time doing when I was a kid, writing short stories and poetry, and I just loved it. I was always really drawn to it. It's what I studied as an undergraduate and also in graduate school, and I was well on my way. That was where I was going with my life. I ended up being awarded a teaching fellowship when I was in grad school. And at that time, I absolutely fell in love with teaching. And I ended up being a teacher for almost 30 years. And during that time, I also became a mom to my 2 wonderful children. And so many of you understand that there are only so many hours in the day. And I started writing less and less and focusing more on my children and my students and my obligations. And so I sort of turned away from my writing life for many, many years. And I'm actually so grateful to my main character, Victoria Nash, because once she arrived in my imagination from whatever magical and mysterious place characters come from, her story became so compelling to me that it was a story that I felt like I had to tell. And so little by little, I started clearing spaces really only in the margins of my life to work on her story. And it took me about 13 years or so to write this book. And it was a very long journey for me. And I think makes the fact that it's in the world and has been this, very shocking to me, international success, all that more sweet in a way, because I really have worked toward this my
Right.
entire life, but I'm
Yeah.
only arriving to it now. So
Wow. No, congratulations. And it was a very wonderful, enjoyable book. And I want to
thank
know a
you.
little bit more about it. But what made you choose? Because I know it's based on true events.
Yes.
But so how was your research process and why did you choose this particular subject as your to write about as your debut novel?
Yeah, well, I think a couple layers to that answer. And one of them is that um, I really wanted to tell the story of strong women. I wanted to tell some sort of a story that dug into what it means to be a woman in the world, with all of our vulnerabilities, all of our often untapped strengths. I think Victoria is a character in the story that I wanted to tell about who she is and how she becomes herself little by little throughout the course of the novel. That was what compelled me first. Victoria came first. And then the setting of Iola, Colorado, as you mentioned, came second. But it all came together for me in a very passionate way because I am a fifth generation Coloradan, as you mentioned. My family and I are deeply, deeply rooted to the land here in Colorado, especially the high mountains. I live every day of my life at 9,000 feet elevation, and I am immersed in that wilderness and in that landscape all the time. And that is the same place where the novel is set, in the Gunnison Valley of the western slope of the Colorado Rockies. So it's an area that I know very well and has meant so much to me. And a little slice of kind of unknown Colorado history is that Blue Mesa Reservoir that you read about in the novel. Beneath Blue Mesa are three drowned towns, Iola being one of them. And I always found that very haunting. Even as a child swimming in those waters of Blue Mesa Reservoir, knowing there were towns at the bottom of that lake, I found that very haunting. And as my novel started taking the turn toward being about place and about displacement and home and family and where we turn when those very essential things are lost, I really wanted to also resurrect, in a way, the town of Iola and ask some questions about what was it like for those people, and be able to tell that story of a town that was erased from the map that many people, even here in Colorado, don't even know existed. So it was a combination of those two things that came together that made me wanted to investigate Victoria and place it in the valley that I know and love so well, and tell that story of Iola as well.
So obviously you said a little bit of after reading your book, I did look into
Did you? Yeah.
yes, I did. And so there are a couple pictures that I saw of the valley before it was the flooding happened for the to
Yeah.
create the reservoir, the biggest reservoir in Colorado. Um, so that's the base that is fact, but rest of the
Yes.
care, what is the fiction? How do you, if you'd have to separate in your
Yeah.
book, fact versus fiction, what is, can you tell us a little more about what part is fiction or
Yes, yes, it's a great question because it was a real challenge for me as an author to sort of walk the middle line between telling a story that actually had a real time period and a real setting, a real history, but also populate it with fictional characters, fictional plot. And you asked earlier about research. I did a lot of research, even though, living in the Valley for all of my adult life, many, many decades in the Valley, knowing the history of Blue Mesa Reservoir, I did a lot of research around the building of the reservoir, the damming of the wild Gunnison River, just to make sure I had the particulars correct. I did a lot of research around peaches, which we can talk about also. And I just really wanted to know that I had the historical context correct. And then all of the rest of it, the story that I wanted to tell, is all fictional and all from my imagination, but rooted in what I hope is truth of what would have been like for a young woman to be coming of age in a house full of rather ragged men in 1948 rural Colorado. What was it like for the people of Iola, who had farmed and ranched that land for generations, to be displaced, forcibly displaced by the building of the reservoir? And of course, previous to that, what was it like for the indigenous people who were so violently displaced previously, so that the predominantly white farmers and ranchers of Iola took over that land? Like, there were layers and layers of story to me to tell around just this, what most people would drive by and just see as a beautiful lake. And so, yes, there was historical research to be done and then a lot of imagining to be done. And it was my job to sort of tie all of those together into a story that would get into readers' hearts and also delve into some of these really essential thematic concerns that I was most interested in.
Is the time frame, the book is set in the late 40s up to 70s. So were you,
Yeah.
during your research, were you able to talk to anybody who was actually part of that town and who had to
Yeah.
move out because of the project?
Yes, yes. As you may have noticed when you looked into Iola, there's not actually a lot previous to my novel being published, and so widely received. There really wasn't much information actually about Iola specifically. We have some wonderful historians in the Gunnison Valley. Many of them were former colleagues of mine at my university where I taught for 27 years in Gunnison. I know the history of the valley, but Iola was often just sort of lumped in with, a general history of that part of the valley. There was very little information for me to be able to find. Um, in fact, when I first started doing my research, there were on the Wikipedia page, there were 2 sentences about Iola. And but I'm sure also if you looked into it since 2018, where we had a significant drought here in the American West, and especially in the Gunnison Valley, the town of Iola, for the first time since 1965, when the valley was flooded to create the reservoir, the town of Iola actually emerged because the waters in the reservoir dipped down so low. The Los Angeles Times picked up that story, and Iola, I had been writing on this novel for many years, and it was well before I was able to publish it and get it in the world. But suddenly Iola was in the news, and I certainly had never anticipated that before. The time period of the novel, as you mentioned, it opens in 1948 when Victoria is 17 years old. It takes us through her very difficult journey until 1971. That time frame of the book was really set by the time frame of the building of Blue Mesa Dam, because they started evacuating the town of Iola in the late 1950s, early 1960s. The construction of the dam was completed in 1965, and the river was choked and the water was rising throughout 65 and 66 and into 67. And so because I wanted that experience to be a central part of Victoria's story, that time period really set the overall arc of the time period of the novel. Super fascinating for me to get to dig into that time period. A lot changed in American culture from 1948 to 1971. And so it was a fascinating era to examine in the context both of the damming of the reservoir, of ecology, of human rights issues, and a lot of progress for women in that time period as well.
Yeah. Like you said in the beginning that you wanted to write a novel about strong, independent women. And in the beginning, when you start reading the novel, it says how Victoria just fell into the role of, just taking care of the family after her mother's death. And I feel like that's a strength also. Yes, unfortunately, she didn't have a choice, but what at that age, what she did for her family, took care of the entire family, took on all the responsibility. That's one way of showing the strength. And then how we read the novel and what she goes through in her life, it's just a different way she keeps showing her strength. And what made me think that it looks like if you don't think too deep, you feel like, oh, she was just forced to do this work, and then but I feel like we are so strong if we really want to choose to do something. When she chose to take care of her family, she chose to take care of her family. When she chose herself, she also left her family to do what's right. So like the strength was shown in all the different aspects, and it was to me, it was like true. This is how in our life also we all are women. I usually, when we do this program, I have never seen any men join. Usually our crowd is all the ladies, and I know a lot of them personally, and I know we all are so strong in each on our own way. So I really, really enjoyed reading the Victoria's journey in your book. But
Well, thank you.
how Will's character, like you, um, of course, that kind of shifted the the life of Victoria after she met Will, but you chose not to show or tell rather too much about previous life of Will. Now, was that like a conscious decision? What was your thinking process behind it?
Yeah, it really was a very conscious decision. I'll just mention one thing about what you said about Victoria is that I very purposefully set up her overall journey throughout the novel, gaining that strength that you mentioned, little by little by little, almost in a two steps forward, one step back sort of trajectory throughout the novel. Because as you mentioned, I think that is more accurate to how we grow. I think particularly as women, where we have to gather up our strength, discover our resilience, move forth in the face of challenge, and bring that gathered strength with us. But we often falter and have to learn our lessons again, gathering our strength little by little over the course of a lifetime. That is how we become ourselves. And that is why, you know, Victoria does go through an awful lot in this novel, but I think that is just true for all of our lives. We might face one challenge, but other challenges are bound to come our way. My question was, how do we respond? How do we grow and become ourselves and discover our strength as we face those challenges throughout our life? And I wanted to explore that through Victoria's character. So thank you for seeing how she builds that growth little by little. Tied back to Wilson Moon's character, hands down, Wilson Moon's character was the hardest part of this novel for me to write. I very much wanted them to meet, as you all know. Everyone's read the book. Can we do spoilers or no spoilers? I wasn't sure. What do you prefer?
Go for it. We got thumbs up.
Thumbs up,
Go.
okay.
Yep.
Okay, well, everyone who's even read the first few pages know that Victoria Nash and Wilson Moon meet on the very first pages of the book. And I wanted to start the novel that way as a little bit of a meditation on serendipity, quite frankly, because I think it's really fascinating how our lives can be going along a certain direction, and then suddenly something happens that just completely, in an unanticipated sort of way, changes the trajectory of our lives. I think that is true for all of us. And I wanted to start the novel there. But I also wanted Wilson Moon to be a very different kind of man. I wanted him to be someone so lovely, just as Victoria is so lovely, where both of them have very tragic, very difficult backgrounds. Neither of them have been able to be fully realized because of the prejudices that are against them. The expectations of who they are in the world as opposed to valuing who they truly can be. These two young people come together and they discover in one another something very special about themselves as well as each other. I wanted to start the novel there and ask, well, then what is now possible for both of these characters now that they've discovered somebody who can pull out from them something very special and maybe unknown to them previously. Wilson Moon's character was sparked in me, as I said earlier, about that I really could not tell a story about displacement in the American West without digging into, on the degree that I am able as a white writer, that I am able to include the Indigenous experience. The tragedy of the Indigenous experience throughout American history, but for me, especially on the western slope of Colorado, those layers of displacement beneath the reservoir, the pain of that. I needed some way to acknowledge that, but at the same time, not pretend to know or be able to own Wilson Moon's story. I think that that's part of the tragedy of the both attempted cultural and physical genocide against the Native American people, that we sought too often culturally to steal their stories, and I did not want to do that. So I wanted to bring in Wilson Moon as a drifter, as kind of a child of nowhere after generations of displacement for his family. And I wanted to see him only through Victoria's lens, because I felt that that was a lens that I could write through legitimately and respectfully as a white writer. She's a very naive young woman. She didn't ask him a lot of questions. They merely connected human heart to human heart, which I thought was very beautiful because it was transcendent of all of those biases. Um, and so I did, yeah, very purposefully leave a lot of Wilson Moon's story out because I didn't think it was true to Victoria's character that she would know a lot of the particulars. And I also wanted to be as respectful as possible to the character of Wilson Moon. I also then had to make a choice about whether or not to shy away from the horrors of racism, the type of racism that a young Indigenous man like Wilson Moon, a drifter coming into a rural Colorado town in 1948, the type of racism that he might face. And I ultimately decided not to shy away from that racism, again, hopefully out of respect for Will's character. So you can see it was very, I put a lot of time and effort and thought into how to represent Wilson Moon's character, and I love him. I love him with my whole heart. I carry him as someone so real to me as I do Victoria, and I really value him and the role that he plays in the novel.
My next question was what you just mentioned, the racism against the tribal people, indigenous people. Have
Yeah.
you in your lab in your lifetime, have you personally witnessed any, or have you heard stories that you have heard that injustice that they might have to face?
Yeah, sure. I'm very much a student of history, and I'm very much a student of Colorado history. And also, as a fifth generation Coloradan, I've inherited the stories of my family. I'm very aware of the fact that my ancestors, my great-great-grandparents who homesteaded here in Colorado, both in the northeastern area of Colorado and in the southeastern area, the only um, way that those ancestors of mine were able to come west and establish lives in the what is now Colorado, because they came when it was still a territory, it wasn't even a state. That was part of the mythology of manifest destiny and westward expansion into what was historically completely legitimately indigenous territory. And so I have been raised with a tremendous amount of respect for Native American people. I have studied indigenous cultures for my environmental history, philosophy, and literature courses, and tried to bring to my students as much as I am able a deep respect and as many stories and history of indigenous people as I possibly can. I've done a lot of volunteer work in South Dakota and two different Lakota reservations, and also in the Four Corners area, to try to really get to know indigenous people. They have so much to teach us and share with us. And I really was raised, thankfully, personally, with so much respect. But of course, I have both witnessed personally and have and have studied historically the tragedy of the misrepresentation and the dehumanization of Native people. And that is an American tragedy that I think is not talked about often enough. And it was something that was very important to me to include in my novel.
In your opinion, and you don't have to answer if you don't feel like it, but what do you think, why is it so hard to coexist?
Yeah.
Um, why can we coexist? And I'm an immigrant also. Uh, is it white supremacy, or according to you, what do you think it is,
Yeah.
if you have to
Uh,
answer?
uh, it's a brave and wonderful question, and one that I think we all should be engaging in far more often than we do. I engaged in that question constantly in my classrooms, not with an agenda, but with a curiosity and with a goal of getting my students talking about this incredibly complex issue that is unfortunately one of the deepest reality of American culture and American history. And as you say, historically, but also deeply perpetuated in contemporary culture and contemporary experience. Why is a very, very complex conversation that we could probably have for weeks, and a conversation that I hope culturally we continue to have forever until we're able to be transcendent of those biases. I think that it's so deeply embedded in the American cultural reality, that there are biases deep inside of all of us that we may not even be aware of that are there. And I think that is an extremely complex issue that needs to be dealt with on an extremely complex level and with the utmost amount of respect for one another. And I hope that that is a conversation that we together culturally continue to have, because it does take a lot of courage and insight and generosity of spirit and open-heartedness, but complexity in order to have that conversation. And I wouldn't begin to even venture to explain the whys of it, the why we have it, but I would very much call on everyone to participate in how can it be healed. Like I said, I love Victoria Nash and Wilson Moon for coming together as two young people who completely looked past the inherited biases. They were trained culturally to be suspicious and hostile to one another, and yet they were able to transcend those biases and not look beyond race, but to just merely see one another as deeply lovely human beings. And I truly wish that we all could do that more often.
Yeah, yeah. No, thank you. Thank you for answering that. Um, Before we move, okay, so my next question was, again, after losing Will, getting pregnant, and she had to make some hard decision that if she wants to, bring new life in the world, she has to kind of give up the life that she has.
Yeah.
What, according to you, what gave her that strength that she can even think of surviving in the wild for that duration of time?
Yeah, well, I think yet again, enter my ancestors. I come from these incredibly strong, humble, stoic people who get up every day and do what needs to be done. They are hardworking people. Um, they have a grit, I guess I would say, about them. And I inherited a lot of those stories. My grandfather was an extraordinary storyteller. And I learned a lot of these stories of my ancestors. And they were incredibly strong people, but I would argue especially the women. My great-great-grandmother, who I obviously didn't know, but I did know my great-grandmother well into her 90s. So I was about 11 or 12 years old when she passed. Her family, my great-great-grandparents, homesteaded in northeastern Colorado. Not long after that, my great-great-grandfather died out there chopping wood, I think it was. And my great-great-grandmother raised, I think it was 7 children out there on the Eastern Plains. They dug into a hillside and lived in a sod home. They raised cattle. There's a strange story of one of them killing a wolf with their bare hands. These are people who were gritty enough and hardworking enough and industrious enough to make a life um, in this place that required a lot of them. And a lot of that's been handed down. I feel like I have some of that grit inside of me. I also live in the Gunnison Valley among farmers and ranchers, and I see that grit among my community members every day. So when asked the question of, when I cast Victoria Nash out into the wilderness and she has to survive out there and she has to give birth out there, I'm tapping into, like throughout all of human history, women doing what they had to do. My ancestors gave birth out on the plains of Colorado. I know that women are fully capable of doing this because this is how women have functioned for hundreds of thousands of years. And I knew that Victoria Nash could do it. And but it wasn't easy. None of it was easy. I also wanted to show that she was fearful, that the wilderness was terribly scary for her. I would like to talk about how she eventually makes peace with the wilderness, but how none of it was easy, but it was all inside of her to rise to the moment. I often say that one of the things I wanted to explore in this novel is the degree to which we, as humans, but especially women, are able to bear the seemingly unbearable. And we don't know the depth of our strength and resilience until it is deeply challenged. And So
Mhm.
poor Victoria had to really figure that out. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Again, her hardship doesn't end.
Yes, I
When she gives
know.
birth, another hard thing you have to do is give up your child.
Yeah.
So why do you think you chose that she has to do that? She knew that if she brings her a child with her, nobody would accept her, or
Yeah.
knowing. So, what was your thinking behind that?
Oh, I actually am I'm I'm actually really grateful to get to tell all of you as the readers that I didn't know Victoria was going to do that until she did it. I mean, this is honest. As you are reading the book, you can see that Victoria herself is sort of flabbergasted, is sort of shocked that she laid her baby down on the back seat of that car. When she sets out after the snowstorm sort of seals her fate, we have to remember that she's starving.
Mhm.
She's delirious. She's given birth. The baby is dying, basically, of starvation. They both are. She sets out because she knows she simply can't stay there anymore. She doesn't have a plan. She has no idea what she's doing. She knows she just has to move. And she's walking, and then she sees this scene, and a woman with an infant and full breasts that could nourish her baby. She's not fully in her right mind. All she knows that she, as any of us would do, must do anything she possibly can do to save the life of her child. I came to know Victoria Nash so deeply as a character, and it's such a dream come true as an author that once a character takes on a life of its own in your imagination and in your writing, I do this because I was typing, going, "Oh, Victoria, I didn't know you were going to do that." The most, it's the most wonderful feeling as an author when you're so in the groove with a character that they actually sort of take over the narrative. And that scene all played out in a way that I actually had not thought through. I didn't really know what was going to happen. And it was as surprising to me as it was to Victoria, as it was to all of you. But I think in that way, the authenticity of that moment is what ends up making it both believable and so powerful, maybe emotionally. Um, Poor Victoria, she didn't choose that so much as it became a necessity. And yes, of course, she did know, had she shown up back in Iola with a baby at all, as an unwed young woman in 1949 at that point, and it was of indigenous heritage, she didn't know that her brother, her murderous brother, and his murderous friends had already left. She thought that if she brought that baby back into the town, that they would harm it, as well as, just I have had so many older women come to me and tell me, thank you for telling that story, because they were often also placed in that horrific situation in the 30s and 40s of giving up a child because of the cultural shame around that, really leaving them no choice. And my heart is so broken, and I feel so deeply for older women who, of that generation, had to face that ultimate sacrifice. I'm grateful that I got to tell that story because it ended up meaning a lot to a lot of readers. But I will say that I did not have that plotted out. I did not know that that's what Victoria was going to do. And I was as shocked as all of you, and sad, actually.
Um, Now, like you mentioned about peaches, uh, how much research did you like? Because when you think of peach, all I see is Georgia number plate.
Yeah.
Georgia is known for their peaches. Like, so
Yeah.
can you tell me a little bit more about the Nash peaches and the research that you ended up doing about peaches growing in Colorado?
Yeah, it's so fun for me to get to be able to speak about this because being such a Colorado kid, I had absolutely no idea that the whole world didn't know that we grow some of the most amazing peaches on the western slope of Colorado. It was in one of my first author events when I was out on book tour after my novel was released here in Colorado. I never had to mention how exquisite and valuable and sweet and juicy and big and beautiful our peaches are, because we all know that. The minute I left Colorado, the first question I would always get asked from the audience members was, "Do you really grow peaches in Colorado?" And I remember being so shocked by that question the first time. So yes, we really do grow absolutely exquisitely beautiful, sweet, fabulous peaches here in Colorado. And what I've learned from the research is that it's the particular minerals in our soil from the snow runoff off the mountains, as well as warm days and cool nights that they don't have in Georgia and they don't have other places. A big temperature difference between the day and the night that sweeten the peaches, especially as the season rolls on. So they really are a cherished thing here in Colorado, and it becomes a strong symbol throughout the novel. They're very, very difficult to grow here. And so it becomes a symbol of this idea of growing against the odds, which Victoria Nash certainly does. The idea of resilience in new soil and transplantation. Can you be removed from your homeland and still thrive in a new place? All of that becomes part of the symbolism of the peaches. And it was a real joy to learn more about them and get to write about them in the novel.
Was that her deciding to transplant her their peach trees to the new town is her last attempt to hang on to what's
Yeah.
left of her family?
Right. Yeah, that's exactly it. I wanted to turn the novel toward hope because, as we've discussed, so many difficult challenges happened to poor Victoria, which again, I've had a lot of grief in my life. I've had a lot of challenges that I have had to dig down deeply and face and move forward. I know all of you have. I know everyone listening today carries grief and loss. I wish that we as human beings, when you asked earlier about the divisions and the prejudices in our interactions with one another. I wish we all could be just more kind and more gentle and more understanding of one another and connect on this place of grief and loss. We all know it. And I want more compassion and more kindness towards one another. I think that I needed to acknowledge that in the novel, but I also needed to also remind everyone that there is always hope. And Victoria being able to save at least something, the last beautiful thing, she calls her peaches, to help her be able to save something and pour all of her love into the transplantation of her orchard and to be able to maintain that love of the peaches was my way of saying that there's always hope. And so I thought it was really crucial that even though it was very difficult to do, that she was able to at least save something and carry something of value and meaning into her next phase of her life.
And I actually loved how you kind of uh, end the novel with
Okay.
left a little bit to our imagination after,
Yeah.
son and mother, they embrace each other and then you know, kind of ended. Thank God she has something good
Yeah,
happening
something.
in her, in her life. So do you see yourself moving this story forward in the next generation? Do you have any other project in your back pocket? What's going on? Anything you can share?
Yes, well, I want to I agree with you. I love where I ended the novel, and that had been my intention all along. This novel went through a number of revisions, over that 13 or more years that I was working on it. I revised and revised and revised. I think that is my method, my way as a writer to get it just right. But I always knew this is where I wanted to end it. But I still feel compelled to apologize to any of you readers who felt that I kind of just cut you off a little too abruptly at the end. I've gotten that feedback from a few people. And I will tell you the reason I ended it where I did is that I felt that I had given you enough information and enough heart heart insight into what all of these characters are capable of. The fact that they were all brave enough to dig down and show up in that very final scene, I feel like tells you everything that you need to know about what they are capable of moving forward. We know it's not going to be perfect, but they were brave enough to show up. And I have so much admiration for that. I'm so grateful for that. Another one of the first questions I often get from audiences is, will there be a sequel? I think because of the way that I ended it. And
Yes.
again, before I was first asked that question, it had never crossed my mind, never crossed my mind. But so no, I am working on a new project and a new novel that's very different than this one. It is set here in Colorado, but it's
Okay.
in a different area and it's a different story. But who knows what the future will bring. I don't see myself ever taking the end of the novel and moving forward into what happened with Victoria and Lucas and Inga. But I wouldn't mind going back potentially in the future and telling some backstory, maybe Ruby Alice's backstory. I think she's a very interesting character that carries a
Well,
lot of grief, and there's a story to be told there that I only allude to. So who knows if maybe some of these characters might show up again in the future, but I don't have any plans to do any kind of a formal sequel. Yeah.
okay. The new book that you're working on, is it again based on real events or it's pure fiction?
Yeah, no, again, an event in Colorado history that I think needs more attention. And so having with Go as a River being my first novel, I will tell you, I had no idea what I was doing, really, even though I've studied writing my whole life and I've taught it and everything else. I'd never even imagined myself as a novelist. But I was so passionate and compelled by this story I wanted to tell. So I learned how to write a novel by writing one. And I feel very excited to go into this second project knowing a lot more about what I'm doing and how to tell this story, and also how to walk that fine line between actual historical events and fictional characters and fictional plot. So wish me luck. I'm working on it
Absolutely.
currently.
Absolutely. No, best of luck, and we can't wait for your next project to publish and read and hopefully talk to you again.
Thank you.
But I heard something very exciting news that your book has got bought for movie rights.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes. I know.
so
Isn't this remarkable?
yes, it is. We're very excited. Can you share a little bit more about the project if you can?
Yeah, yes, I will. As I mentioned, I wrote this book as privately as you possibly can write. I'm not part of writers groups, and I didn't even share it with my husband or my daughter or anybody for many, many years. I'm very private and quiet about the way that I write. And so putting it out there in the world was very vulnerable and scary and exciting to me. And I really thought, hey, if it shows up on a couple bookshelves, I'll be really thrilled. Instead, became this international bestseller. It's being translated into 34 languages. It's on bestseller lists all over the world. I think it's in 40 some countries. And yes, there's also a film contract on the novel. That is a very slow process. As I understand it, you have to know I'm learning all of this as I go.
Yeah.
The publishing world, the film world, all of it was completely alien to me. But I am working with a wonderful, wonderful production company named Mazer Kaplan, and all they do is bring books that they love to film. So adaptations of books is all they do. They're the
Oh,
most lovely people. I trust them completely with this book, and that's really saying a lot. But with the strike in Hollywood last summer and some of the complexities of getting a project moving, it's evolving, but it's evolving very slowly. I'm told I can use the words, it's in development. It's in development. That's I guess
okay.
that's all I
Okay.
could really say. So
Yeah. Well,
um yeah.
that, congratulations, and another thing that we'll be looking for on the screen. So
Yes. Well, thank you. I
that it's a
appreciate that.
great
Yeah.
news. That's a great news. And anything that lately, before I open it up to our patron, that's just last question. Anything that recently that you read that you would like to recommend to our readers?
Oh, goodness. Yes. I have had the great pleasure of meeting so many wonderful authors throughout this journey the last couple years. I've basically been on book tour almost, off and on for 2 years and all over the world. And I've met some incredible authors and have been so honored to read their books. I really loved my friend Alice Wynn's book, In Memoriam. I think that that is a really compelling, beautifully written novel that I would that I would highly recommend. I The Glass Chateau by Stephen Kiernan is a novel that I've really loved. Gosh, now that I'm thinking of so many that I'm losing my train of thought of some of them. Under the Tamarind Tree, brilliant, beautiful novel as well by Nigar Alam, also a friend of mine. She lives in Minnesota.
Okay.
So those three immediately come to mind of authors that I've met who I've had the great pleasure of reading their books and being able to say how much I loved them. Yeah, so I need to start posting better about some of the books I've been reading lately, and give a nod to some of those authors. But I will tell you that when I'm really deep in writing my own fiction, I don't tend to read anyone else's. So I lately I've been taking a break from reading because I've really been trying to move this second novel along, and I don't like to get the stories confused in my
Yes.
head.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
No, thank you. Thank you for sharing those recommendations. And I would like to now open it up to our readers. If they have any questions, guys, feel free to unmute yourself, raise your hand. And if you want to ask a question, go for it. Or if you want to type it in the chat, Sabina and I can absolutely ask it for you. So do we have anybody? Do you guys have any questions?
And I will say, I was telling Pinky, I love questions. I love question and answers. So the sessions in these. So feel free to ask anything.
Mrs. Thayer, you have a question?
Oh, always.
Always, go for it,
Always.
please.
When I got towards the end of the book, Shelley, I got to the part where the boys and their family, Lucas and Max,
Yeah.
were listening to the draft being announced on TV for the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And the two birth dates that came up were August 31st. And each of the boys, of course, had that as their birth date because the family didn't really know the real birth date of Lucas. But I think you did your research in that part.
Yeah,
because my brother's number was number 11, and it was August 31st of that year. So when I got to that part, I said, oh my gosh, did she do her research? And I will never forget it because my brother was in college at Bentley University and he was playing hockey. He was on the hockey team and he was here at Trinity College playing against them. And that's when they announced that the draft had ended. So we knew all along that he was number 11. That was August 31st. So when I saw that in the book, I said, oh my gosh, I can't wait to call my brother and tell him that he's in a book.
Oh my goodness.
So
Wow.
did you do your research there?
I sure did. Yes, I really did. Thank you for telling that story. That moves me to no end because what a scary, strange thing to have called is your birthday and that and then no choice really in then what will happen after that. Thank you so much for telling that story. And yes, I did do my research. And I'll tell you that scene came from two things. My grandmother, who was one of my absolute hands down most cherished human beings. I adored her with my whole heart. She had three sons, my father and his two brothers. She told me the story years ago, many years ago, well before I started writing this book, of them, a very close family, all sitting down in the living room, gathering around the television for that exact moment. And my whole heart, mother to mother, so much about this book is about my mother's heart. I have two children that are my life and I adore them. My grandmother the thought of a mother sitting down with her children, 3 boys, her only children, all boys, watching fate being pulled out of a vat and read. It was, that story moved me so much that I never forgot it. And I wanted to include that. And then I actually did the research of exactly what that looked like. There's actually a YouTube video of it. You can Google it, you can find it. And in doing that, you can actually see the television broadcast, exactly what it looked like, and see every one of those dates that gets pulled up. And so those are the actual dates.
I
And
lived it.
I did do that research. I bet, I was going to say, I bet a number of you
Right.
lived it. Oh, gosh.
It was a beautiful book. I absolutely
Thank you.
loved it. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you so much. Thank you
You're
so
welcome.
much.
Thank you, Mrs. Thayer. Before I call somebody, I just have one typed question from Carol. That your book has a very appealing cover. Did you have any input into the design?
You know what I've found is that authors have a little bit less input into the design than one might think. Like, I think that you, as a writer, dream of the cover of your book, you know. And what I've learned, because now with my book being published in so many different countries, there are, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 different covers of my book out there in the world. I have a few of them here I can show you. This is the French version. It was actually originally from Canada, very different. This is Portuguese, just came in the mail. That's Portugal. You can imagine this one is China. There are so many different interpretations of what is the most important thing. This Spiegel and Grau, my US cover, was the very first one. They are my primary publishers. I love them so much for taking a chance on me. And this was their very bold cover. You can all imagine, with a novel titled Go as a River, I certainly expected that they would have a river on the cover. But when they chose to go with the peach, that was actually the first time that I really understood that for the reader, the peaches ended up being a very, very important part of this novel. And I love this cover. And so, of course, they ran it by me. Do you like this? And I said, yes. But what I learned is that you kind of leave it up to the experts of cover design and what appeals to readers. And the publishing houses know better than I. So I didn't choose it, but I ended up loving it. And it really does stand out on a bookshelf, this cover. So yes, I love this cover.
It is a beautiful one. I have, Diane, do you have your hand raised? If you want to ask a question, go for it, please.
Yes, thank you. I just want to say I'm a librarian and my book club read your book and we all loved it. So thank you for that very much. But I want to ask about the title. It's incredibly symbolic, but like, how did you come to that as a title?
Yes, thank you for that. And thank you, librarians, and thank you, book clubs. That gives me an opportunity to say thank you to both book clubs and librarians, because I give you and independent bookshops, those 3 entities, and also I think Bookstagram, the Instagrammers who really are focused on books. Those 4 entities, I never really realized what a powerful force they are in the world, that when they fall in love with your book, they are the ones who spread the word about it. And I am deeply, deeply grateful to librarians, book clubs, independent bookshops, and people on social media who have spread the word about this book. I owe you everything. You were central to its success. So thank you. I'll start there. Thank you. The title of the novel, Go as a River, the exact phrasing of it comes from the Buddhist monk, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk, Thich Nhat Hanh. I don't know if any of you are familiar with him. He is an exquisite man. He died a couple years ago, but there's plenty of his teachings. And even if you don't see yourself as being drawn to Buddhism particularly, it is, to me, just one of the great wisdom traditions. You know, there are so many great wisdom traditions out there from various cultures that I have really loved in my life, just gathering from the various wisdom traditions as a guide to living my best life. Thich Nhat Hanh has been very important to me in my life, but he also was a beautiful calligraphy painter. He had hundreds of calligraphy paintings. And years ago, I saw a very simple calligraphy painting that he did that merely said, "Go as a river." And I've spent a lot of time with wild rivers, a lot of time out in the wilderness, learning what the rivers know, learning what the mountains know. And I wanted to incorporate that into Victoria's journey. And the idea of what does it mean to go as a river is something I've pondered very deeply in my own life. And it really is Victoria's entire journey in the novel of her figuring out what does that mean. And what it means for me is the ability to move forward. You know, rivers find a way to move forward against obstacle. They carve new banks when necessary. They go up and down and around. I live near the Gunnison River and all of its tributaries. And to me, every season, no river follows the exact same path, 2 springs in a row. Rivers are always moving. They're always finding a way to move forward. And I find a lot of strength and a lot of inspiration in that. So, you know, the 3 rivers in the novel, the Gunnison River, the North Fork River, and the Animas River, are almost characters in and of themselves in the book. And I think those rivers have so much to teach Victoria. And I think all of the wild rivers in our lives have so much to teach us. And that is all embedded in that title. That really means a lot to me. So thank you very much for asking that question.
That was a wonderful question, Diane. Thank you. And thank you for the great answer, Shelley. Kathy, do you have a question? Do you want to unmute yourself? Kathy, you have to unmute yourself.
She's coming.
There you go.
Okay, am I now?
Yep,
Thank
you
you.
can hear you. Go for it.
Okay. First of all, I love the book and I loved your description of everything. Your description of a sun coming up and a moon going down. And when I particularly found Victoria, who I loved, and I had cried so much because she was so sensitive and she did so much of the right thing, sending the horse back. Abel, I cried during that whole scene. And again, it was when she had to make the right decision. So I always thought of her as being alone, but then as the book developed, she wasn't alone. When she connected with nature and she knew that there was so much life around her, that's what gave her that life. And then when she ended up in the book, she had the mother, the not the birth mother, the other mother. What did you call her? I forgot the other mother. And then her friend. And then the 3 of them went to the sun. It was like she was never alone. When she came from that, she got her strength from never being alone. I loved it. I loved it that you're not alone in this world, no matter what.
Oh, Kathy, I love that. I love that more than I can even begin to tell you, that you felt all of that, because it was so in my intention of writing the book to say all of that, you know, to say that the wilderness has and the land has
Life.
so much to teach us and
Mhm.
has a way of holding us, you know, it has a
Yeah.
way of holding us and guiding us that has meant so much to me in my life. And, you know, really Victoria's only friends until she meets Zelda and then Inga are the trees, is the land. She shows up in the wilderness so fearful, but eventually she says, I realized I had never been less afraid in my life. Once she realizes that she is part of something so much grander and more vast than herself in the tapestry of the natural world. I feel that way. I feel that way every day in my life, and it's guided me and given me more strength than I can ever tell you. So you tapping into that and valuing that in the book, honestly, it's making me feel a little sweaty. I'm so grateful for that. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm breaking out into a sweat. And I think it's because that really matters so much to me. And I love the reader that feels that and can carry that forward. She always tries to do the right thing, sweet, lovely Victoria. She just isn't sure. She's so naive and she's had to figure life out by herself. And she is just not always sure what that is what the right thing is, but you know she is trying to do the right thing. And I love that about her. And I love when eventually she does turn toward female friendship and human connection with her friendship with Zelda and eventually meeting Inga. I'll share with all of you that when I go back and reread this book, and I will tell you, previous to publication, I read this book 1,000 times in all of those revisions that I did. And then I wondered, once it was published, could I read it, or was I always going to find this little thing wrong or that little thing wrong? And the answer is no. I sit down and read it occasionally, and I love it. And I'm so grateful that I was able to finish it after all those years. And when I read it, always I cry, and I cry multiple places, but I always cry in two places. One, when she has to send the horse away.
Oh,
That scene for me wrecks me. So I'm glad that you felt that as well. And then the second
I
time
have
I always
tears
cry.
now.
And the second time is when she finally meets Inga. Those two places in this book came from such a deeply authentic place inside of me that it was just sort of evolving almost on its own. And I think they're both very revealing of something very essential that I wanted to say about the human heart, you know. So thank you very much.
That came across. Your writing is beautiful. Your adjectives and your description are, I have learned many, many new adjectives to add to the script. I love the book. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Oh
Thank
my
you.
gosh, that means so much to me. So thank you so very much.
Thank you, Kathy. Shelley, you clearly wrote a book that you wanted to read. You know, they say write a book that you would like to read. So you clearly did that, and it came from a pure heart, and it absolutely reached the heart across the world. So thank you so much for sharing your beautiful writing with all of us, and a little bit of the history that we were not aware of. And I thoroughly enjoyed your book, and can't wait to see the movie and your second novel. And hopefully we will have you back again with your next novel published. And we wish you best of luck with your future projects. And thank you so much for spending your valuable time with us. And thank you so much.
Oh my goodness, it's been an honor and a joy. And thank you all so much for reading and feeling my book. And thank you for the wonderful questions and discussion. I've been very honored to be here, and I'm just very grateful for all of you. So thank you all very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good night, good evening, everybody. Bye.
Okay,
Thank
bye-bye.
you.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.